Well, hello and welcome back. This is Frantz Kantor here, cartoonist, illustrator, toon talker, and I'm here at the Australian Cartoon Museum doing penance. I'm here to draw another illustration, and in particular another caricature. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit about our subject. So I've done a little thumbnail here. If you don't recognize his name or his face, that's fine. It's this guy here. So it's Doctor Zachary Smith. That's the subject of today. So this is him in Series 1. Very iconic, very memorable performances. And of course, Lost in Space, it's the first series, not the new one on Netflix. So he actually died in 2002. He was born in 1914. He had about 500 television show appearances. So he was on a lot of shows from in that era, in the 60s and the 70s. Most notably, I think, apart from Lost in Space, I mean, he was in a movie, Botany Bay, with Alan Ladd. But most notably in TV, it would be things like I think it was Twilight Zone and a few other bits and pieces here and there. I Dream of Jeannie, probably, or not I Dream of Jeannie, the other one, Bewitched. Sorry. So he he got around. So he was very he was a very popular character actor, and he had that's not him. So I just thought I'd talk a little bit about the show. So I'm actually using, what am I going to use? I'll use this picture, I think, to do the caricature for. So he was a very interesting character when I was growing up. Here he is with, this is in, I think, the third series of Lost in Space with, gosh, can't remember his name, but he's Grandpa from the Munsters. Al Lewis. This is a sort of a typical angry expression that he used to pose when he got into fights with the robot. This is him acting up with the robot. They had a good sort of relationship, like a comedic banter most of the time. First series I kind of liked very much because unlike the second and third series, it was in black and white. And the storylines were very serious. So from I think the first, if you watch the DVD series, the first disc would be the material from the pilot. So the Hungry Sea and the Giants in the Earth and all that sort of stuff. That was like really serious science fiction fare. And it was based on, of course, the Swiss Family Robinson, except this is the Space Family Robinson. And he was thrown in at the last minute as a protagonist. They needed somebody to have like a regular run-ins with the characters so that they can get that dramatic pulse going in the stories. This is from the later episodes, of course, where it just became very silly. Mind you, Star Trek in the third and fourth episodes became a little bit silly as well in some of the storylines. So it kind of shared a trend of first series always the best series. First series. So that was it. This was from, he played the Pied Piper in an interesting episode of Land of the Giants, which was another Irwin Allen production. Irwin Allen did the Lost in Space, he did the Poseidon Adventure in films and Towering Inferno. He also did the Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea. So he was an old hand in that sort of science fiction TV productions. This is Jonathan Harris with Zorro with Guy Williams, of course. So within his character acting, character acting area, he was pretty much top dog. This is him meeting William Shatner, of course. Dr. Zachary Smith meets Captain Kirk. This was on, I think, the studio lot of Desilu Studios. This is him meeting Mr. Spock and the little Spocks, I think. So Leonard Nimoy. And this is what Leonard and William Shatner used to think of Lost in Space as ratings compared to Star Trek. So it was... it's a funny sort of show, really. And I think in many respects that's why I like it. A lot of people like it because it doesn't really... It's a family show, and it's not like Star Trek or Doctor Who where there are a lot of real dangers. You know, this is something that the family could sit down and watch. We had cliffhanger endings every week, but basically, well, first series anyway. But basically, it's family fare. So, you know, that's why I think a lot of people have a warm spot in their heart for Lost in Space. So what I've done here is I've got a thumbnail sketch of a shape here. So he's a very sort of, I don't know what that's a chip. that's a Dorito with a bit taken off, a bite taken out. So I always look for something to explain the overall shape based on the idea of reduction. So that's a design principle, graphic design principle. You reduce things down to its basic shapes, basic elements, in order to communicate faster and cleaner and better, right? So drawing is a form of visual communication, and we're going to explore that. So it's always good to have some sort of a handle on, you know, we often call people, you know, round heads or square heads or oval heads or pear-shaped people, you know. So we have a very keen sense of similarity or comparison between something difficult and something easy, right? Difficult is a human head. Easy is comparing it to a Dorito. It's simple, right? Simplification. So the process I use for a caricature is it's a sort of a simplification in terms of form, of shapes. And from that simplification, I'm able to get some form of variety, which is a dialogue with the pencil, right? Of all of these elements, a dialogue of all of these little elements speaking with one another in showing what's relevant, what's important in the drawing. So caricatures, like portraits, have a recognition factor, and that's based on certain things that we detect as humans. One of the things, four of the things that we detect are the eyes, nose, and the mouth. And they're situated in this sort of a T-zone configuration, or a mask zone, Mexican mask zone type of thing, like that. So the relationship between the eyes, the nose, and the mouth is very important. You know, even when you exaggerate proportions and scale, like I'm doing here with the nose, right, and the chin, and making the forehead bigger and the ears bigger, etc. So I'm scaling shapes, right, exaggerating shapes. That's the second principle that I use in caricature. One is simplification, so that you simplify everything, you reduce everything down, and exaggeration, where you start to have fun with the lines themselves. And that's where you put in the details. So most of the details, you're going to be focused on this T-zone area, the eyes, the nose, and the mouth. Okay, that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So let's proceed. I've done a little, I've taken this thumbnail, and I've done a quick sketch of it on this toned paper, and I've used a brown pencil. This is a, what's this one, a terracotta? No, sienna brown. Also got a reddish one somewhere. which is a Tuscan red. There's also terracotta, which is a lighter one. So why do I use brown? Well, the principle of using these three colors come from antiquity, from the Renaissance. They actually come from, our caveman past, drawing with white chalk and black charcoal and brown clay. Okay, so it is a principle of drawing with natural colors on a toned background, so that you're able to invest with your drawing more interesting qualities. Like with the white pencil, in this case is a white soft Prismacolor. The brown is a Prismacolor as well. There's also black. We're using a harder polychromo. So those three colors we're going to be using, and we're going to be developing a three-dimensional effect with the character. Okay, so that means we're looking at drawing light with the white pencil, and form with the brown pencil, and then shade and contrast with the black pencil. Along the way, we can also use things like these flat drying acrylic markers, these Posca markers from uni. They're different thicknesses and types. This is a brush variety. It's got a little ball in it, these things. This is the black one. So it kind of mixes the paint up, and it has a sort of a pump action, so it continues the flow. And the beauty of that is we can use these pens without too much fear of it going through, seeping through the page into the flip side. Okay. All right, here we go. We're going to start. So I think I might just sharpen my pencil a little bit. Now, I grew up watching science fiction. I grew up watching Star Trek, obviously. Oops, what happened here? Doctor Who and Lost in Space. The music, of course, really excited me about Lost in Space more than the others, because it was John Williams' soundtrack, and also they had some big Hollywood heavyweights to provide some of the effect sounds and effects music. So it had a lot of aural atmosphere, and that helped, especially in the first season, where you had a lot of dangerous adventures. Okay, so I'm going to be a bit careful with our caricature. There's a little bit of a slight tilt to his head, so I want to try to line up these. Actually, I might try the darker red for this. I'm going to try and line these up, starting with the irises, the eyes. So try to keep them relatively proportionate to each other. They don't have to be proportionate overall to all of the other elements, but they have to speak to each other as much as you can. If you start messing around with the proportions of each eye, then you've got quite a hard job to establish the rules again. So it's like moving the goalposts in a game while the game is in motion, right? Eventually you're going to have to put the goalposts down somewhere so that you've established a zone, and then people can play. So someone asked me, how is it that you can talk and draw at the same time? I'm always talking in my head at the same time. So I'm always having some form of dialogue. And, occasionally, I won't lie to you, occasionally I have a quiet period, when there's a lot of uncertainty in the situation, in the drawing. There is a little bit of, I'm sort of slowing down a little bit over here. There is a little bit of something I want to be careful of, and that is the distance between the eyes, the iris, and the left and right side of the eyes. So working with toned paper and brown pencil like this, you're able to establish some warm tones, which are kind of nice. They're they're more human-like, skin-like, flesh-like, I suppose you'd say, in many ways, because flesh is warm to the touch, and people, and it kind of feels right. Right, well, he's got a lot of wrinkles. Well, not so much well, he has got wrinkles, but he's got a lot of muscly features here on his face, a lot. He's an extremely expressive man, and both with his speech and with his mind. He's incredibly articulate. You can tell that by his focus, His whole face is sort of angled and proportioned to make his eyes stand out. It's very interesting. So, eyes are fascinating things. They take in information, they also express emotion. And there isn't a lot of expressing of emotion here, but there is a lot of magnificent control. So if you want to talk about mind over matter, this is an perfect example of mind over matter. This is look at these wrinkles here. There are a few breaks here and there, but essentially they have a single purpose, and that is to communicate beautifully. Really, really beautifully. He does that so well. So, it's a hard job, really. The character that he had was incredibly one-dimensional at first. He was just a bad guy, and he brought it into a more of a human state, a more of a human emotional state, emotional performance. Whereas it was sort of like an uncle or a grandfather character in the end. That's the sort of appeal that he had, I guess, or the standing he had with the family and in the family dynamic. There was a lot of interesting banter between him and the robot, and him and Major West, which was Mark Goddard. There you go. All the other characters were pretty much on their, part of their own sort of family, part of the family dynamic. Will was probably more of a smaller, it was more of a curious scientific character, like interested in science and geology and things like that. So he was a smaller version in many ways of his father. So he had a sciencey background and all this sort of stuff. So he's very quick to get into sciencey stuff, sciencey adventures. Dr. Smith, of course, was more of a medical doctor, I think. It was Colonel Smith at first. There's quite a few titles that he had in the show, none of which really explained his interests in seances, for example. A lot of the plot lines and things were a little bit of a stretch, but you know what? He pulled them off. I don't think anyone else could. Mr. Spock couldn't have done that, you know. So some of the more outlandish adventures that he had on the show were achieved. They were popular. Or they worked because of his ability to sell them, his ability to sell that performance. And of course, the performances got, you know, wilder and wilder as the series went on. They just sort of threw everything at it, including the kitchen sink. So they had different adventures, and there was always every few episodes there would be an alien with cross purposes that would pop out of the sky, and then they'd have to, you know, deal with that. That was the thing, but there wasn't any real danger as such. Well, maybe from the robot's point of view, but you know, there was always, it's a family show, and that's what made it successful. You know, it had that silliness. Mind you, you've got to remember that at the same time, or shortly after, there was Batman, which was, you know, high camp in terms of its humor. So it wasn't really a show that took itself as serious as, say, Doctor Who or Star Trek. Star Trek was, you know, the frontier. It was the real stuff, you know, the real aliens, where the danger is, and the viruses and the all of the things that could potentially threaten your life in space exploration, right? So that was part of the premise of Star Trek. You know, go where no man has gone before. Lost in Space was based on Swiss Family Robinson, only in space. So it was totally different set of dynamics here. It was a family, and you could see how the family coped with these pressures and possible, you know, dangers, but definitely adventures, you know. And to their credit, they achieved quite a lot with very little. They had very little, you know, comparatively, I think budget-wise, they had a smaller budget. But they achieved quite a lot. I mean, the robot, for example, was designed by, the robot and the ship and the chariot were designed by the same genius, the same designer as Robbie the robot. So it had an immediate iconic flavour to it. You know, it just looked the part. It had that sort of a immediate pop icon quality. So, you know, I mean, that's that, and the music, I guess, and the fact that you had these stars like June Lockhart, who was out of Lassie, Guy Williams from Zorro, Angela Cartwright, sorry, not her sister, Angela Cartwright from Sound of Music, and Billy Mummy from, it was a TV kid. Billy Mummy was in Bewitched and Twilight Zone, was a great actor, child actor, sort of very good range of abilities, acting abilities, which you needed for this sort of show, because in order for it to achieve something, it had to offer more than, light comedy. It had to have something like a feeling, a message, even just something in there that could hold its own against Star Trek. And I never watched Star Trek when I was a little kid. I watched Lost in Space. So I was pretty new to, I think I watched Star Trek on the reruns, as you do. And I still watch it, and I still watch the first series of Lost in Space. But that doesn't stop me from liking, what they do on, say, Netflix. I love the new stuff as well. It's just very interesting to have that variety. I need to get his eyes a little bit lighter there, because they're kind of crossing a bit. So I'm going to use this eraser just to cut it down a bit. Go back to the paper, and then move the eye up. Yeah, that might work better. There's a lot of little lace type lines here, because there's a lot of work, these eyes both taking in information and also expressing. They're incredibly expressive, so there's a lot of range of emotion. So we're going to complement that over here, even though I can't see very much of the lacing on the left hand side. I'm going to put it in anyway because it makes sense. So building up tone, just a little bit of light and dark. I'm going to go over it obviously with a black pencil, but just to give like a basic set of rules of light to dark, and then I can use the black pencil to increase the contrast, to make it more effective. Okay, good, getting there. So there's a lot of lines here. We're going to be here for a while. Now this is an interesting thing, the nose, because with the nose there is a lot of sinew and not soft tissue, but harder tissue. It's harder than muscle usually. So the size of the nose is a kind of a weird thing. It doesn't really have, it's genetic obviously, but it doesn't really have any purpose. It's not really to shade the mouth. It's more of a sensory organ, of course, because of sense of smell. But in this case, it's incredibly pronounced and strong. So there's some thought that it actually acts as a sort of a central part of muscle formation. So muscles form, especially complex muscles. All muscles of the face are the same, right? They all have the same amount of muscles, but we have different forces acting on the muscles. And those different forces are created by our thoughts and emotions, and they show up in the wrinkles and the forms and the forces that push and pull at these forms on our face. One of the forms, the central form, of course, is the nose. So around the nose are muscles and tissue that's pulling and acting on this tissue. What else is there? There's an opening and closing muscle for the eye. There's also a lot of very, very fine sinews, not sinews, but tissues along the face itself to give microexpressions. So this is like a structure that's created for communication. And the thought about the nose is all of these muscles pushing and pulling in all the directions of the face. They kind of act on a spokes of a wheel. So they do act a little bit on the nose. There's like if you can wrinkle your nose, you can get a bit of shape distortion in that. But it's kind of an interesting anchoring that this tissue has. So I don't know why the sizes vary so much. It certainly has something to do with this bone here, which is at the bridge of the nose, right? And it's hereditary, of course. So if your parents have a certain shape, or your family has a certain shape in their nose, it's going to be pretty much similar to what will happen to your nose. I'm putting a little bit of a spin on the nose. I'm putting a little bit of a shape on here, just a little bit, because he is turning slightly to the left, and I want to try to catch that as a twisting notion, twisting idea. I think it makes it interesting. So you have his nose twisting one side and then the mouth twisting back the other way underneath. I think that would be interesting. So at this stage, apart from the lightness, which I am concerned with, but it's not an overriding concern at this moment, I'm trying to capture some meaning in these arrangement of elements. Cheekbones, of course, are nearly always visible, not always in all faces, but they're close to the skin, as is indeed the cranium. And other things like we won't go into, like the jaw, the lower jaw. So there's, always look at structure when you're doing a drawing of the face. There are anatomical structures which you cannot get away with. You can't just draw with a knowledge of what you see in the reference, try to transpose that. No, you have to draw somewhat under the skin. So the structure underneath, it gives you meaning to the different twisting and turning of the features. Right? Everything has a purpose, has a range or a propensity to, turn one way or the other. And it has some form of structure underneath. And the structure can dictate the intensity of the twists and turns and the furrows and the folds and things. So there's also thinking about lighting too. We haven't really spoken about that. So the lighting on the reference seems to indicate that top left. So everything down on the bottom right would be in shadow, right? So that's the direction of shadows, and certainly describes a lot of the shadows in the face. So again, think about the forms that you're drawing. Don't just draw things without understanding why it's there. Think about why it's there, and when you're drawing, when you're distorting the shape itself, think about the underlying structure and the anatomy of the forms. So I've been drawing faces a very long time, and I find it very exciting. Every time I draw a face, it tells me another story. And these stories are, I tell these stories, relate these stories with a pencil, which is kind of interesting, you know, because pencils, like, we all draw when we're kids, you know, but to actually use a pencil as a form of communication and study, you know, I'm studying this expression, not just the major features of the face either. I'm thinking about what these features mean, what these expressions and microexpressions mean, what the lines mean, what are they telling me about this person, you know. So the character of the person is, you know, is very well balanced, it appears to me. That's my impression. Incredibly powerful mind, incredibly focused. So there's a lot of lines that back up that intensity of purpose. Okay, so there's also some complex arrangement of tissues on his chin as well, which it's a little bit difficult to explain, but nonetheless, it's a fascinating set of differences between a normal geography of the face and Jonathan Harris's geography of his face. It's very interesting. So I want to try to match the level of the angle, not the angle so much, but the extension of that cheek muscle on the left and right, without losing too much. You know, you put too much brown in, and you start to lose the quality of the paper. So it's always good to think about, you know, maybe bringing it back here and there. So there you go. It's getting very Dorito-like. Put in a planet here. I'm going to switch light sources from this angle, which is the light lighting him, and then the space angle out in the galaxy in the background. From memory, yes, from memory I can draw his Lost in Space uniform. That's, you know, the least of my problems. I want to put in a shadow here too. I think that would be good. I'm going to darken these lines around his lower face especially. I thought also, you know what would be interesting, because they're wearing this velour top, and I'd give him a little bit of a paunch maybe. I thought I'd have his arms folded behind his back. That would be good. There you go. Put some more planets. Put some mesas, referring to the landscape of the planet. Good. Match that over there. And maybe put in a spaceship with Jupiter too. Tilt it to the side. That'll probably work all right, I think. Right, so I'll just clean up I just want to put a little ribbon. I usually do these little ribbon things with the name, write the name on it. So I just want to clean that up a little bit. I've got quite a long name. It's uneven. Oh well. Right, so let's get into it. What should we do here? Let's put in some highlights in the eyes first, and we'll understand how light. What are the lightest points of the drawing going to be that we're establishing here? So let's do that. Match the left eye with the right eye. Maybe put a highlight there. Okay, well, let's continue on. So I'm not outlining, I don't want to outline the eyes too much, but I am aware of the darker qualities of like the pupils and the eyelashes, for example. They should be a bit darker. Any important folds like around the eye, you know, just I'm making allowances for their dark qualities, but I don't want to outline anything because then it changes the whole dialogue, the whole differences of light and shade. So I want to try to keep within the bounds of what I feel and what I see, but also what I feel in the reference. So it's not just a matter of slavishly thinking of the photograph. You know, once you establish these rules with light and shade, and you want to sort of respect the hierarchy that you're establishing. Okay, all right. So let's we would have a little bit of a line underneath, just a bit, not too much. We'll kick out these lower lashes just a little bit too, I think. A tiny bit. Some of the wrinkles. Alright, so we might need to get some paper to lean on in a sec because I've got to go up into the hair. So I don't want to smudge the lines that I'm working with. I always think when I look at his forehead how Mort Drucker did his caricature for Loused Up in Space, the Mad Magazine feature that he did in the 1967. The likenesses that he did of stars were impeccable. But when he got a chance, he went overboard and really got into the beautiful, not symmetry, but like a movement, gesture in the lines of the face. This sort of movement of relevant lines that created this beautiful set of movement lines. They were gestural. They had like what's the word? Like music. They sort of related to each other like music. A rhythm. They had a rhythm. That's what I was looking for. That word again. And yeah, music and dance applies to drawing because it's that sense of life that comes from movement or the ability to move, that informs us that it's living, breathing tissue. And there isn't anything like the human body experience for reflecting life and movement and expression. So there's nothing like this. It doesn't exist anywhere in nature or anywhere else probably in the universe. It's quite a unique machine. The human face, especially human body, but particular the face. Hands as well. We also communicate with our hands, but primarily with our face. We're very unique in that respect. We have body language, but so do animals. Animals have body language, but we have a whole different range of abilities that are quite different to the animal kingdom. So it's almost like we're not evolved from the same tree, the same evolutionary ladder. We didn't climb up that ladder, we climbed up a different ladder maybe. I don't know. It's how do you get such a high degree of sophisticated geometry? The microexpressions. When you think about how people communicate with their face, and we learn this from childhood. It's like when someone's angry with you, have that angry look. When they're happy, and everything in between. It's quite an achievement, really. And we're so good at it that sometimes, if you're lucky, your cat or your dog, your significant companion animal, picks up on these subtle micro expressions and meanings through repetition, I guess. But it's that in itself is another amazing achievement, that we can communicate so well that, past the human experience into the animal experience. We haven't been able to do that, of course, with animation, 3D animation, like motion capture and things like that. Doesn't really, they're good, and in the dark, Andy Serkis doing Gollum or King Kong or something is very good, very accomplished, with the tools at hand with motion capture, but there's still a little bit of uncanny valley, which is the telltale sign of it not being real. So that's because we're so adept at recognizing these elements of life, I'm going to put a shadow under that nose because I think it's relevant to the shading. It's quite nice. Actually, I think I'll need a bit of shadows here just a little bit to round off that form. That'll do. Yeah, so I'm looking at the wrinkles. I'm being careful not to overemphasize them with the black pencil. It's always a tendency. It's always an issue sometimes with the black pencil. You think, oh well, just keep going, and before you realise it, you've just changed the tonal properties too much, and you flattened the forms by regulating the light and shade. And when you do the white, of course, you don't colour in. You don't colour in anything in this process. You leave. This is why you've got grey paper. So you bring things forward, you push things back, but you don't colour in. You don't recolour the colour. It's already there. You know. I can put a little bit of colour behind the black pencil, just a little bit, just to warm it. But basically, I think I might just leave that. So, I didn't watch Star Trek at first, I watched it in reruns. So I wasn't aware how cool it was. And everyone's saying, oh, why are you watching Lost in Space? You should watch Star Trek. And I collected all of the magazines and stuff. I loved the Mr. Spock and the images and things like that. But for some reason, I just wasn't watching the show. I think something else was on that interfered with that time slot. I can't remember what it was. Luckily, we're able to watch it anytime now. I can Netflix it, and I always find things that I haven't seen before, Even with Lost in Space, I watch a lot of the first series, and there's some things that I don't remember seeing. So, it's an interesting experience, isn't it? Like something that backwards. This is a show that I used to record the audio. I recorded the audio, and I'd go to sleep at night listening to the music and the dialogue. And to the point where I could actually recreate the dialogue. I have to stop myself sometimes from doing that because it annoys people to no end. So there's a lot of drama in his eyes, in Jonathan's eyes, and I want to try to keep that happening. I want to try to keep that. You know what? I think what I've lost here is a little bit of the intensity of the black. So I've got a black brush. Let's try to build up some more. Re-establish the pupil. That'll do. So everything in ink isn't equal. All right, let's try to hit it with a black brush pen and see if we can get some more thick and thin qualities to the lines. That would be good. So I watched this show pretty much all my life, and it had an interesting effect on me. I like the family dynamic. I like the loyalty and the messages of, you know, to support and all this sort of stuff. But I like his genesis. His what would you call it? A sort of a character. I like his character flaws. I find them very interesting, and that's the new Doctor Smith, the female version in Netflix is the same thing. You know they're so it's like a situation where they're so one-dimensionally bad that they're good. So but they are dangerous, of course, you know, and they are selfish, and he was very I'm sure he would have thought the character needed more human qualities, and that's why he probably got the character to be more cowardly and more emotional, have more emotional connection with the characters, with Will and Penny and that, and the rest of them. They're sort of like a member of the family. But it did change the, you had to now find more villains. So they had to get more villains from the aliens. So all the aliens that arrived, there was always a villain. I think that was the payoff at the end. They had to do that. Let's build up a bit more. I'm going to go over this area here. Before I do that, I'll just start up here. Oops. See, these pencils are very soft, and you've got to be kind of careful. They will break. And they break on their own. I don't drop them or anything. They're just soft. Maybe I was just thinking there might be a better way of storing them rather than out in the open. You can put them in a sealed box. Might have something to do with the oil in the pigment, that binder. It could get, maybe softens too much, perhaps. Don't know. The wax. Don't know what the properties are. But it's a good. They're a really nice pencil for building up highlights. So that's what I'm using this for, to have it more sculptural effect for the drawing. A lot of very powerful wrinkles up here, furrows, forms that indicate very definite thoughts. Some very powerful minds here. Mine and his. No, I don't have anything like this. Very singular purpose, I think these lines tell you. It's sort of a lot of intention, a lot of purpose, a lot of work, and there's a shine area in the center of the head, which is I'm going to capture with the white pencil in a second. I just want to get some of these edge lights around the forms. I might build them up a little bit more with the brush, but okay. So now, let's see if I can. It's got a little bit more here than I've credited him for, so I'm going to put a little bit more reference in there. Will do. Right, so getting there for this. The forehead, I've been waiting for this moment. Now we're going to start to play with this. So I want to form this round, I want to have this round pate, this round skull shine through the flesh, and these ripples of forms over the skull surface itself, the wrinkles of the forehead. I want to try to give them a stronger sense of purpose. So there's a slightly stronger effect. Yeah, it kind of works. That's good. Build it up a bit more. Right, keep going. So, there's some very interesting twists, not twists, but muscles in this nose shape itself. There's very definite forms under the skin that give it both volume and definition. So it's not just a round blob. It has a lot of definition. Okay, that's good. I think now we'll start to build the light back into this eye. So when you're drawing forms, think about the anatomy. Think about the light. What's the light doing? Don't just paint or draw the white of the eyes white. Just because they're called white doesn't mean they have to be white. They're not. This is another white pencil. This is a softer, not as soft as the Prismacolor, but I think we can try to get some of these finer details in there. That'd be good. Oops, no, not soft enough. You can see quite definite difference between the pencils, especially the white. Has a lot of coverage and can quite easily go over other pencils. So it lightens. You can see the pink area there where it's gone over the Tuscan red. So I'm not colouring in, I'm creating form. So there's a reason why there's texture and tone that I'm capturing in the face. And think about the cheekbones and think about the shadows under these wrinkles, under these forms, the texture of the skin to create a nice sort of shininess to the texture. It might help with the form itself.
There is, we can push that up there, a little bit of highlight there. Should I do that? Maybe. Try it out. Right. So, okay, there's a bit of a dimpling in the chin. There's some other smaller highlights here and there, which we're trying to capture an essence of. There's so many here, we can't hope to do justice to them all, but I think within reason we're doing all right. Yeah, so a bit of blending. I am going to hit it with a white Posca, just to help it out here and there. I think it might be advantageous. So, what have we got here? We've got we've got a brush Posca with a flexible tip, and it's got a pump at the edge on the end. It's a bit hard to manipulate. It does tend to dry out a lot, so it's a bit harder to manipulate this, I think. There we go. That might work. We don't know yet. We don't know. So what I'm doing here is I'm just helping out the sort of a three-dimensional effect with a side lighting, and just to crystallize some of these white pencil lines. Just so that they're a bit stronger where I need them. Okay, yeah. Looks alright, I think. You notice I've stopped talking. That's because hyper-focused on this last-minute little details with the lights, with the brush. So I can't get under the nose because the lip's gone under the shadow of the nose, or under the form of the nose. Try to get some of these highlights. Again, don't think of it as colouring in, you know, just do it a little bit to help out the lightest part of the white, of the lighter areas. So you keep the hierarchy in mind, you know, the lighter parts of the of the lighter areas and darker part of the dark areas. You keep that relevant. So I've lost looks like I've lost I have lost. So I'll bring that back. Yeah, that'll do. Right. Let's get into the background very, very quickly. We're on the last, we're on the home stretch now, I think. Pretty safe to say, I think we're getting towards the end. I was going to put a word balloon, you know, with a saying, but he's got so many sayings, it really, I think, too much. Bubble-headed booby. He invented, these were all off script, they weren't scripted, they were he just had normal insults. Jonathan Harris became very creative in his character role. And to his credit, the director and Erwin Allen, the producer, allowed it to happen. And so he had more say in the script dialogue. And later on in, of course, the character arcs themselves. So he was responsible for a lot of the emotional part, the emotional Doctor Smith, which I must admit I didn't want to. It wasn't really an interesting thing for me. I love the you know, the effects and the story, not the stories, the creativity and the designs and things. You know, even the masks, the silly rubber masks for a lot of the aliens are, you know, they're very inventive. This was a show that spent their small, meager budget wisely, I think. But by then, you know, you had the people that did the rubber masks in Twilight Zone and Outer Limits, which were black and white and very moody and effective. In color, they tend to not work as well. So, you know, you could see the budget, and that hurt, you know. So in many respects, like, you could see why Star Trek kept having humanoid aliens rather than masks. The arena episode where you have this Gort or something, can't remember the name of the alien, but it had a rubber mask, and it wasn't as interesting as, you know, the humanoids, the more human elements, because it couldn't move. It wasn't animated or indeed animatronic, so it had inherent issues with, you know, believability. It just didn't work as well. And even to the case of We're Lost in Space, where it relied on the abilities of the actors to sell that silliness of some of these masked aliens. It still didn't pull it off. Still didn't quite pull it off. But the first series was pretty perfect. It was pretty much perfect from my sensibility. There are a few episodes in the colour series that I did enjoy, that had sort of other when they're written really well. You know, I really did enjoy them, but some of them weren't as well written. Okay, let's get into this now. And John, I have to spell it out as I go. I think it's quite good. I like it. Does it look like him a little bit? I think I've exploited the Dorito. I've exploited the Dorito. It made me quite hungry now. So this is the Dorito. No, this is Jonathan Harris, aka Doctor Zachary Smith, from the 1966 to 1968 or 69 science fiction show Lost in Space. This is the reference that I had of Dr. Smith from another show, actually, from another drama. Yeah, great guy, fantastic. I love those lines, the shape. It's just a joy to work with, so much fun. I hope you guys have enjoyed it as well, as much as I have. This is Frantz Kantor, and I will catch you on the flip side. Bye-bye.